Who reviews the reviewers? We do. This is Yesterzine, where we rejudge a magazine's best and worst rated games and dive deeper to find out what games coverage was like when we didn't all just find out about them on the internet. Only just before that though, because we're in the 21st century this month for what might have been the last really big contemporary games magazine launch. Because we're here for issue 1 of GamesTM, the magazine that asked you to trust it when they didn't even really have a trademark on the name Games. And yet, it was direct rival Edge that got sued over their name. Where's the justice? Paragon Publishing's GamesTM was transparently set up to take on Future Publishing's Edge. But you either defeat your enemies or you grow up to become them. Paragon Publishing's GamesTM became Highbury's GamesTM, followed by Imagine Publishing's GamesTM after issue 40, a change it marked only with a genuinely subtle last page. And then, for the final 2 years of its life after issue 180, it would take on Future Publishing's Edge as Future Publishing's GamesTM. Future having 3 multi-format console magazines as late as the launch of PlayStation VR and the Nintendo Switch was never going to fly. And in late 2018, Future killed off both GamesMaster and GamesTM in the same month, paving the way for Edge to remain. Playing the long game, Future. Respect. And at least both outlasted Future Publishing's CVG, which had been closed right back in 2004. For a magazine with a 16-year run, it really does feel like GamesTM was a fleeting moment in games history, probably because of its relatively late launch. If you've been paying attention, then maths will tell you it was as late as 2002 that Paragon had decided on a bonanza multi-format magazine launch, and if one on this scale happened any later, I can't remember it. If I start to tell you the games reviewed in it, you're probably not going to be happy to find out they are all 20 years old. We'll get to our 9 out of 10 awarded gaming heaven in a minute, but this was a hell of a month in gaming. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 4 gets 8 out of 10, and the conclusion, how on earth are they going to top this? If we're honest, they didn't. It's here we took the diversion via Underground, a DS version that inexplicably tried to use motion controls, Project 8, and then back with the disaster that was the eventual TH5. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell gets an 8 and is nearly the game of the year, and the game Metal Gear Solid 2 should have been. Still not the best score in the issue. Soul Calibur 2 is reviewed in the arcades, and enough said. A classic that only got better on home release, where each version got its own format-specific bonus character. The highlight, of course, being Link on GameCube, something I once inadvertently called his first fighting game appearance, when he'd been in 2 Smash games by this point. It's a wonder I don't accidentally punch myself in the face trying to get my jumper on in the morning. Another 8 for Unreal Championship, a multiplayer shooter sequel to Unreal Tournament. Can't argue there either, I spent a lot of time on Unreal death matches. Tournament was second only to GoldenEye as our uni shooty bang of choice. Street Fighter Alpha 3 on Game Boy Advance too gets an 8, and quite the achievement it was. We're not even done. 2 gigantic series released their first games this month. Animal Crossing hits the GameCube, where GamesTM predicts it will be ignored by the mass market. To be fair, they also point out it would be better if it was online, so a score there. Speaking of mass market, almost a footnote at this point is Kingdom Hearts, Square's make an entirely opaque RPG but put Mickey in it franchise that seems to work a lot better than it had any right to, even if I've never got into one of them. And we're still not done. This month sees Star Fox Adventures, a James Bond game, Red Faction 2 from Volition, better known for Saints Row, an interesting looking GBA Tomb Raider game, the console release of More Like Doom Than Doom Is shooter Serious Sam, and the surprisingly innovative hard drive based gameplay rewinding antics of Blink's the Time Sweeper. Whew. Also, yes, we're done. Apart, of course, from our gaming heaven and hell, what came out in late 2002 that could possibly be a genuine step better than Kingdom Hearts, Animal Crossing, Tony Hawk, Splinter Cell, and Soul Calibur? Well, that's easy, because it's what I would contend was the true coming of age for a legendary series. It is weird to think that when the first Grand Theft Auto came out at the end of 1997, it was largely considered a gimmick. Coming from Lemmings developers DMA Design, it felt very much like that developer making something a 12-year-old would consider adult. Top down, less than a CD of soundtrack, no speech, and at best awkward to control. IGN rated it, quite literally, okay. And that was the general impression. Game rankings eventually coalescing to a score of 68, the 94th best PlayStation game of the year. If the series had ended here, we'd have never seen it on Yesterzine unless some idiot gave it 73%. It was followed by a standalone expansion based in London, which averages 69%. Nice. And then by a sequel whose clever aesthetic and gang versus gang balancing gameplay didn't hide that it was basically the same game, albeit with advanced improvements like the ability to save your game. Still, another 69% average from the reviews. Equally as nice. And yes, the much more recognisable 3D World Grand Theft Auto 3 was the breakthrough critically and commercially. It got a 97% Metacritic rating. It was the best-selling game of 2001 and second best of 2002. But it's not quite where the GTA we know emerges. Later Grand Theft Autos are categorised by their main character, but GTA 3 doesn't really have one. Claude, the player avatar, is silent. I don't even think he's named in the game itself. Can you imagine GTA 5 without the three main characters being themselves? GTA 3 was also the last under the DMA Design name before they became Rockstar North, and only has about a total of 4 hours of radio. Which brings us finally to our actual gaming heaven. Because a year later they tried again, with an 80s theme, their first proper main character, and a soon-to-be legendary soundtrack of licensed songs. Our first GamesTM 9 out of 10 is Grand Theft Auto Vice City, a game so iconic the mere mention of its name causes Kim Justice to appear from wherever she was previously located. This is where GTA got its style. Tommy Vercetti is voiced by the much-missed Ray Liotta in the most spot-on piece of game casting ever that didn't involve Mark Hamill. But that does give me a chance to prove the point that GTA was a footnote until its 3D incarnations. Because here is Ray talking to Conan O'Brien about the role.
When you do this game, people, you think, okay, I'm just going to do this voice, it's not a big deal, and then it became a huge hit, and it's sort of part of the pop culture now. Is that surprising to you?
Totally. I had no idea. I'm not a game player. I was never a Pac-Man guy when that first game came out. I was never into that stuff at all.
It's not cool to say, I was a big Ms. Pac-Man guy. I gobbled up all those glowing blue.
In terms of any kind of games, I never played any games, and this was like, it's just like it sold like 8 million units. It's like a $400 million movie.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah, it's like you're in a huge hit movie.
Huge. And it was fun. You're just sitting there cursing at people.
As we join Ray's voice attached to Tommy Vercetti, he's just been released from prison after serving 15 years for a crime he absolutely committed. You gotta get back on the horse, which, after a slight accident with Urban Dictionary, Tommy interprets as getting involved in a drug deal. It goes as well as you'd expect, and Tommy dumps the goods and the money, fleeing with dodgy lawyer Ken Rosenberg. Which is the point we get involved, and our first thought is the controls have aged. While there's sort of twin-stick control, it's not really, with the right stick switching you straight to a static first-person view. The driving has held up better, and Vice City immediately makes the style statement that would go on to make it the best remembered visually of the entire series. You dropped into your first drive across town through an 80s neon cityscape with Billie Jean playing from my speakers and straight into an almost certain copyright strike. You even quickly forget the PS2's limitations in this section. The draw distance is largely good enough, although the fuzziness does sometimes prevent you from spotting items like traffic as well as you'd expect to. There's also the issue that playing a game from this era does reveal quality of life issues. There's no sat-nav, so you're figuring it out yourself. And when you get to the hotel, the save system is clunky and took so long on this, my original PS2, that I wondered if it had failed. As you leave, the plot is set up. The head of his mafia family is not super thrilled with the situation, and Tommy needs to retrieve both drugs and cash and murder whoever sabotaged the deal. The next hour's a bit slow. You forget how much of early GTA is simply driving from cutscene to cutscene, and there's quite a lot of busy work, starting with a clothing shop, then a boat party, then dropping a woman off, then Ken again, then the strip club, then finally at least some action as you have a sensible, reasoned and mostly fist-based discussion with an informant. The punch controls mainly serving to remind you to make a mental note never to run out of ammo once they let you get a gun. Which is now, thanks to this mysterious stranger who you again drive to a cutscene in a totally not a Lamborghini he apparently doesn't mind getting a little dinged up. Skipping forward some to a proper mission, our quest is to disrupt a workers' protest and blow up their vans, and it'll do to highlight a major issue with the game. The first time, as you would, I inevitably fail. Having started a fight with the workers, I am woefully under-equipped, and understandably they beat me to a bloody pulp before I can destroy the vans. Which wakes me up at the hospital, with no weapons and less money. So I have to drive to the gun store again to stock up, then drive back to the lawyers to start the mission, then go do the clothes buying that's part of the mission again, then drive back to the actual mission, where I again get pulped. So what you do, of course, is you drive out of your way to manually save before every mission, but even then you still need to do the clothes and driving bit. It's unfriendly, unfair and unfun. Dying, in what in this case I subsequently discover is a mission I can finish in 30 seconds, but only when I've forgotten to turn the capture on, means 5 minutes of busy work to start again. It's at least as annoying as C64 Hook last month, and these days it's incredibly frustrating. At least in older games you could start again straight away, and a modern game would have checkpoints. But here it's just a trek to get back to square one. Not even that really, because losing weapons and money means that retrying after failure is actively more difficult, which is self-explanatory as a one-sentence explanation of poor game design. For all its upsides, this kind of thing does make a game like Vice City a tricky task to want to play again on original hardware. And that's a shame, because otherwise I'm already really liking playing it on original hardware. There's a compromise. The PlayStation 2 is the last format where a standard PC drive can read or indeed rip the game. So, as I switch to PCSX2 on Windows, I am running this off the exact same disk I'd ripped to the hard drive on my soft-modded PS2. It's as close as we're going to get. Assuming you have the computer for it, this gets you one big advantage: save states. Not only are these basically instant rather than the 30 seconds Vice City was taking to save on my real hardware, you can do them at any time. Fail the actual mission bit of the mission, teleport yourself back. The game itself is no easier. The controls are the same, the graphics are identical, but at least there's a measure of friendliness, and what you're repeating is the bit that bothered you before. I also very much appreciate that on all formats you can immediately skip all cutscenes, because I've played the first 2 hours of this game a lot recently. Thing is, I said there was another option. There's actually another option, and it's going to be more controversial than me suggesting you put a PS2 disc in your PC. You may remember last year that Rockstar released the Definitive Edition trilogy of GTA 3, Vice City and San Andreas for current and last generation. And they cocked it up. Badly. San Andreas became a tiny island in an infinite ocean. It started raining. Inside. The frame rate was somehow appalling on a lot of systems, and some of the AI upscaling they'd relied on to do a lot of the work was wonky. Except when it was supposed to be wonky, when it was suddenly buttery smooth. The thing is though, there's been patches. A lot of patches. And so, having briefly flirted with the San Andreas remake early on, I thought I'd take the hit so you don't have to. Coming straight from the PS2 version to an Xbox One X, it's honestly not a bad first impression. It's clearly upscaled game engine cutscene rather than newly created, sure, but it's absolutely better. I guess the problem with any remaster is it's not competing against the original. It's competing against your false memories of the original, which you only think you remember like it was yesterday. Well, I do remember it like it was yesterday. Because it was yesterday. And the same is true when you hit the game. Again, it's clearly a remaster, not a remake, but it's a gigantic improvement even so. It gets better too. Hopping in the car reveals that this game now uses the well-proven GTA 5 control scheme, which means accelerate and brake on triggers. It means a proper third-person ability to look around you, and aiming down sights being on the left trigger where it belongs. You're back at home. It does though reveal the first problem. That soundtrack. A lot of the soundtrack licenses expired after 10 years, and if you've bought any GTA from the OOs on Steam, you'll have found a lot of songs already patched out of it. While they managed to re-secure some of the licenses for this release, it's not all of them. And so we are missing Billie Jean as we make our first drive to the hotel. That said, Billie Jean is one of only 8 that are on my original PS2 disc, but not here. That's barely more than 1 per music radio station in the game. Although given her sudden revival, the loss of the one Kate Bush track in the game may well be keenly felt. You may have noticed another boon. We have a sat-nav. It's basic, just a line on the minimap, and it loves to route you and your truck down every tiny alley in the entirety of Vice City, but it's there. Everything is just nicer. The driving is now something of a joy, even when the collision detection is still pure and undiluted Grand Theft Auto. Whether it's the resolution, the draw distance, or the fact that we're running at around 60 frames per second rather than the targeted 25 on a PS2, I don't know. But I did this early game driving back and forth 3 times in one day, and this was the only time it was fun. Except for one thing. When you exit the lawyer's office early on to start a mission where you intimidate jury members by smashing up their cars, what's supposed to happen is that the car runs over the man who drops a hammer for you to use. On my first attempt in the remaster, it went more like this.
Dumb Florida moron. Think about it.
The problem with game engine cutscenes, I guess. A minor bug, but perhaps a warning that still is not all entirely well with this port. Ultimately though, the fact I could restart at the last checkpoint, which was as I entered the preceding cutscene, means I don't really mind that much at all. If this had happened, and I'd forgotten to manually save since the start of the game, I'd be raging. And I know this because I had screwed up this mission playing the emulator and just such a thing happened. What makes up my mind though is the mission to blow up the vans. It took multiple attempts on PS2, and even when I completed it, dodgy targeting while I was trying to avoid the workers' attempts to rearrange my face meant that even with buying armour, I ended on 8% health. Here, with the same loadout, I was able to execute the plan of blowing up the barrels and then the remaining van with a lot more efficiency and frankly a lot more fun. And given it's not like the game is going to get easier, I'm sticking with this. It's a neat divergence point actually, because it's here that Vice City becomes a GTA game as people remember. We've now got a choice of who to take missions off, and I think I'm going to stick with the remaster to delve a little further. In doing so off camera, I run into a few GTA-ness. The checkpointing, while there, continues to be about as friendly as a Tommy Vercetti kneecapping. And one classic moment where you were escorting someone and the mission only triggers if you are both in the tiny circle. Something I only achieved by swapping the supplied Lamborghini for a Vespa, as it was the only way to keep him close enough. Still though, there's enough here to enjoy. I mentioned there were 3 options. PS2, emulator and remaster. But before we close I should probably point out the 4th. Because PCSX2 recently added the UI from PS1 emulator DuckStation, and also a first pass at one of DuckStation's tricks. DuckStation can render a PS1 game at up to 16 times internal resolution, and it can make a huge difference, as we discovered a few months ago with F197, turning mushy textures into pin-sharp sponsor logos. It did have a tendency to also show off the PS1's dodgy corner-cutting approach to 3D geometry. You may have most commonly seen as instances where brick walls and track edges appear to have been built wavy. The effect on PS2 is a lot more subtle. Here's me standing outside the initial hotel, switching between native and 8K internal rendering every 10 seconds. As you can see, it's making a difference, especially to the signs, and if you have the PC power to pull it off, it's absolutely another reason to play this on an emulator. But even with the slapdash nature of the remaster, it's no comparison. So I'm settling on the remaster, for resolution and control reasons, no matter how obviously lazy it was as a port based on the codebase for, of all things, the mobile versions of the trilogy. But it works, and so does Vice City. I think it's due a replay. Between 2002 and 2012, we got 4 proper GTAs, and 3 of them got standalone expansions so comprehensive they might as well be games. It's another testament to the laziness of the remaster that the definitive edition did not include them. In the decade since, we've got GTA 5, GTA 5, and GTA 5. And given we are surely looking at 2024 at the earliest for a GTA 6, maybe it's time to re-explore the classics. I bought my Xbox disc copy of the trilogy for a little over 20 quid. If it's been 20 years since you played Vice City, or you never have, then maybe consider picking that up. And with marginally tempered expectations, you'll be having a good time, with a series that, while never perfect, was, is, and quite possibly always will be, the king of the crime em-up. If there's one legacy GamesTM has truly left us, it's the retro section. It wasn't quite the first regular one. We'd seen the computer cabin in CVG as far back as 1996. But here, in 2002, is retro as a concept hitting the mainstream. And GamesTM committed. The dedicated, multi-page section was a constant throughout the entire life of the magazine, until it ended 206 issues later. What is retro? Is one of those universal and often tedious playground arguments of the retro scene. The status of, ooh, the PS2 as a retro machine is a hotly debated concept, and it's probably worth me making the unsaid said at this point. Yesterzine is not a retro gaming show. It's an old magazine show. GamesTM issue 1 is 20 years old. It's an old magazine whether or not you consider anything contained within it retro. But there's as many theories as there are games. Some will say 2 generations as a rolling thing, meaning the PS3 and 360 now qualify. Some will say only 2D games, or machines that were primarily 2D, which I guess technically means the Saturn and GBA are retro, but the Jaguar is not. My chum Nikki suggests widescreen as the dividing line, and still others have said HDMI is standard, which is as valid as anything. I don't know an answer, but I suspect the ultimate position is going to be when you could buy a game on physical media and something recognisably the actual game was on that media. Which puts us somewhere in the 360 PS3 generation, coincidentally the first generation that console digital sales were more than a blip in the figures. Regardless, 2002 is so long ago that most of the above definitions of retro are satisfied by everything in the magazine. It's also almost exactly halfway through the lifetime of mainstream home video gaming in the UK, coming 20 years ago, but still 20 years after the release of the ZX Spectrum. So what, in 2002, was retro? Well, for a start, 10 years apparently. Our first page is 1992 scene setting, with little sections on world news and music charts, which turn out to be not entirely unrelated to games, as this was that glorious time that sampling a Game Boy could get you a top 10 hit. And also, somehow, the second time this month I've been forced to remember the Shaman. The chart topper is End of the Road by Boys II Men, a song which few remember was actually about the decline of the NES market in the UK. If we apply the 10-year theory to now, then a retro section today should include the first 3 Far Cry, the first 3 Assassin's Creed, Sleeping Dogs, the first 2 Borderlands, and the entire Mass Effect trilogy. We're talking about everything released up to around the time of the London Olympics, including the game about the London Olympics. A telling piece of gaming news though, as the thing they remember most about the launch of Sonic 2 was the simultaneous worldwide release, a massive novelty on the infamously named Sonic Tuesday. The magazine laments that the practice hadn't caught on in the 10 years following, and massive import delays and crappy PAL conversions were still the norm. At least that's a problem that was solved since. It's a rare big game now where our delay is more than a few days. The 6 of the best section falls on its face almost immediately by highlighting the Master System version of Smash TV for some godforsaken reason. I know we're looking at 1 month, but highlighting a bad attempt to port an ill-suited game to the SMS is harsh. It's not like the rest of November 1992's lineup is a pile of winners too. The Mega Drive perhaps coming out best, adding EA nailing the John Madden formula and the now acknowledged classic Shining Force to its lineup. GTM points out it didn't really land in the UK at the time, but the RPG breakthrough in the UK they attribute, probably correctly, to Final Fantasy VII did lead to it at least making the lineup of the Mega Drive Mini many years later. And something that would only become more common in the future. The magazine obituary. This time, as mentioned last month, the demise of Newsfield, resulting ultimately in the demise of Zap64, as the corpse was handed to Europress and became Commodore Force. Strikingly similar to what was going to happen to GamesTM 3 times in its life now I think about it. Elsewhere, they accidentally invent the concept of Yesterzine 17 years early by talking about how well some games have aged since their original release, highlighting Miami Vice from Ocean as something of a spiritual predecessor to GTA, but one that's aged very poorly. Which is pretty much a too long didn't read version of what I've just spent 10 minutes saying about Vice City now I think about it. But also proving nothing is new under the sea, as they point out Siren City from 3 years earlier is part of the same lineage, and that the absurdity point of that might be Namco's Rally X. The bit that will make you feel old, though, is a section on Zero Wing, or as we know it, the All Your Base game, and how they refer to what they didn't even know is a meme sweeping across the internet. 20 years ago. The All Your Base meme is 20 years old. Bloody hell. We have no chance to survive. Make our time. Perhaps a better indication of what's retro is what the team were playing that they considered retro. And the answer is 4 games. 1988's The New Zealand Story, whose definitive home edition is probably on Sega. 1987's 8-bit classic Head Over Heels, an innovative, massive and incredibly frustrating adventure that redefines value for money. Sega's original Shinobi arcade, also from 1987, and which I got to play recently and enjoyed immensely. And finally, 1984's Manic Miner sequel Jet Set Willy. The sequel to the first platformer a lot of people remember. Having gone very much from the first half of video game history as they remember it though, GamesTM flirt with that line with a section on Street Fighter 2. Yes, the arcade game was 11 years old, but a lot of the home conversions certainly weren't. The section ends with a much safer look at the granddaddy, the Sinclair Spectrum in its games, with some strange highlighted games that suggest to me someone hurriedly photographed their personal collection. Roller Coaster is an interesting one, as Elite later reworked it into the Game Boy version of Dragon's Lair. It's not a great game, but it's still better than most of what's had that logo on over the years. The retro section may have disappeared itself 4 years ago with the magazine, but it still has a legacy, as he was kind enough to confirm on Twitter. While Darren Jones didn't launch it, he wrote for it from early on, and ran it for a while. He left though, when Imagine picked up the dregs of a little company called Live Publishing, who had originated a niche tome called Retro Gamer. That magazine relaunched with its 19th issue, and as we write, 235 is making its way into shops. And Darren is still there. 217 issues into a stint as editor that must now surely be a record for any computing magazine. To end though, I want to cheat and grab a bit from issue 2's retro section. Because they posted a list of what you should expect to pay for various boxed retro machines. And I think I'm just going to put some calming music on and let you read it. Because in 2022, some of this is rage-inducing. I'll see you for the gaming hell in a minute. Movie games. That's it. That's the tweet. Well, it's not, because I have... Look, stay right there. Yes, everyone, that's what that was about. Anyway, the point is, movie games often had a reputation for being bloody awful. And you know, it's not entirely deserved. There's movie games that are remembered as all-time classics. Batman, for example. Robocop 3 on the Amiga. Indiana Jones and the Last Crew... Oh, yeah. Right. But actually, let's stay with Indiana, because sometimes the best movie licenses are the ones that don't tie themselves to a specific movie. Like the excellent Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, which would have made a good fourth indie movie if they'd ever considered making one. It makes sense. Some of the problems with a movie game are because they're often rushed to meet the release of a movie. And the most famous example of that is pretty obvious. Consider Die Hard Trilogy, released well over a year after the last Die Hard movie, as an example in point. Assuming you had a light gun for the middle game, it's at least 2.5 decent experiences in one pack. At least partly because Probe had the time and space to finish not 1 but 3 games without too much interference. Which makes the appearance of another Die Hard game another 6 years later quite interesting. Die Hard Vendetta, released for all the major systems in the UK by NDA Productions, but weirdly a GameCube exclusive from Sierra in the US. As the lead version, GamesTM decided to review it on the Cube. I've got it, and so we may as well start there. And my copy, being American, does indeed have the logo of the publishers of Police Quest. At least it has got very pretty by this point. Die Hard Vendetta gives an okay first impression, not least for naming its difficulty levels the way they clearly should have named the 3 films. It's there things go a smidge downhill. We've got a tutorial mission, because of course we all love those, and what we find through the first part, where it just hands you weapons and tries to teach you to do some standard target shooting, is that the targeting is really quite weird and floaty. It feels like Ian Die Hard has turned up drunk to work, which, to be fair, not entirely out of character. But it doesn't make for easy gameplay. Turning some of the auto-aim settings on is going to be important here to stop this turning into a ZX Spectrum darts game. Still, it's going on a bit, and our best indication the series may have strayed from the Alan Rickman villain classic comes next. Because if we did a word association game, I suspect it's going to take us a long time to get from Die Hard to Paintball. The paintball is there to introduce another awkward inclusion. Hero time. Like John McCain is Max Payne or something. I can see this being one of those things that's going to literally never get used in the actual game, not least because it took me downloading a manual in French and a walkthrough to figure out that to activate it you need to press a shoulder button and a face button at once, which is exactly what you want to be trying to do when surprised by 15 hired goons, or police officers for short. I can't help but notice we're 20 minutes in and I have distinctly not died any hards. And that's not likely to get better anytime soon, because here comes a stealth tutorial. I will shortcut the next 30 minutes. Stealth doesn't work. You have a stealth button for some reason, which makes you more stealth, but as soon as you do just about anything, it snaps you out of it. There's no radar to help you out, and at least on this exercise, the goons do not always start in the same place. They spot you, almost at random, and when they do, you have to go right back to the start. I ended up just punching them. I'm at a bit of a loss at this point. I've spent 30 minutes on this section, and I've achieved absolutely nothing. But I also can't say I've honestly played the damn game. It's just awful. So on a whim, I try selecting the first actual level. And it works. That's 30 minutes I'm not getting back. But as we start the game, and I resolve to use stealth mode exactly never, I'm distracted by the much more serious issue that this is apparently Ian Die Hard. And it turns out Alan Rickman Jr. is putting on an art exhibition, which is being policed by Ian Ina Die Hard Jr. While the biggest crime here is clearly going to be the accent of the curator,
us today as we return this wonderful work to its rightful place in the Townsend Art Museum.
A more litigatable one also happens, as it all goes a bit terrorist, and Ian runs down to the museum, out of uniform and not on duty, to go save his daughter. And they let him. Because it just so happens all his old mates are in charge of this for some reason. And our old buddy Owl fills us in while the Popo take the innovative tactic of trying to weld the doors open. Then he just lets us in after our very convincing suggestion that what you really need in a situation involving terrorists in normal clothes shooting people is a non-policeman in normal clothes shooting everyone. Probably because the longer he talks to us, the more his neck is going to hurt. The game itself works fine. We sneak through the museum to the sound of various identikit terrorists leaping out and finding an increasingly effective line of weapons, the smaller of which we can pleasantly dual wield. I have absolutely no idea what situation you're supposed to use the sniper in. I assume the game fancies itself as more of what we'd now call Sniper Elite, even down to its occasional adorable attempt at a kill cam. But it has neither the stealth nor sniping controls to make that possible. Which is a shame, because that makes this a generic action film style game, which the whole point of Die Hard, at least at first, is what it is not. John is not a kill 50 people at once action hero in the first movie. He's broadly a normal guy, and most of what goes down in the first movie is because he's being clever. There was an opportunity here to be more of a Metal Gear Solid type affair, and that game was absolutely old enough to copy by that point. But instead, at least from the museum level, this is a room-by-room shooter of identical dudes. Although, while it still aims like he's been drinking like your mum on a school night, it's not offensive so far, it's just bland. And it shouldn't be, should it? Die Hard is many things, but it should never, ever be bland. And why put up with that? The internet suggests this is an 11-hour game, which is both pretty slim for a full price release, and also way, way too long when I could, of course, be playing Vice City. Or Die Hard Trilogy, for that matter.
But my paintings, they're gone!
On the back page, Cogweasel and the Gears of Games series of showcasing games that catch his eye and proceeding to get mildly annoyed with them.
And I can't jump on top of crates, that just won't do, and I can't crouch, which is a bit annoying because sometimes I want to do that and instead of crouching I just fall down.
I do like a channel you can just stick on and kind of absorb, and this is stellar in that genre, focusing mostly on quick 15-minute looks at Spectrum and Atari ST games. But if you're in a binging mood, why not watch the Lands of Lore from Command & Conquer developers Westwood? It only took him 56 episodes to make his way through it, and that's the kind of value we need in these trying times. Also, representing absurd value for money, a subscription to Yesterzine for the princely price of nothing. Simply click the button and we'll be in your subs feed forever unless YouTube decide to automatically unsub you, which is almost always. One defense against this is the +1 bell, which should cause them to actually notify you. And you can always let them know you're serious with the thumbs up button or sounding off in the comments about exactly what your personal definition of retro is, because I am sure that will not be contentious in the slightest. Fire in the hole!